All right. Hello, everyone. Whoops. What am I doing? There we go. Hello. Um, Good evening, everyone. Let's get started with our new reading. Um, Sorry, I was just finishing up a tweet. Um, anyway, yeah. So we are reading about the Enigma. This one is titled "The Enigma of India's Origins," followed by one about evidence for pushing back the portals of civilization. Okay, so there are a few pictures. I'll try to show them, but I don't know how well they show up. But yeah, let's jump into it. Where are we go? The Enigma of India's Origins. The dating of new discoveries in the Gulf of Cambay upsets the orthodox scenario for the dawn of civilization by David Lewis. Okay, so pause for just a second in case this is your first time watching. This is from Forbidden History. These are articles compiled from the magazine Atlantis Rising back in the late 90s, early 2000s. It is no longer printed, it is online only, but it's a great magazine if you're interested in things that could be considered a little more fringe in science, history, archaeology, but also it is a great source for finding out about really new findings. I mean, you look at things like archaeology today or whatever, you're finding out about stuff that's been known for years to the scientific community, but it's just now coming out to the public, 10, 15 years sometimes afterwards, like go Beckley Tepe, for example. Um, I'm pretty sure I remember something appearing in Atlantis Rising about 15 years before it came to the public attention, and it was just a little snippet about it, but it was still a preliminary report that hey, this big complex was found in Turkey. More to come, which is really kind of cool. Anyway, here we go. With three-quarters of the planet covered by water, it's been said we know more about the surface of Venus than that which lies beneath the sea. Yet this may be changing. The discovery of what may be a lost city off the coast of western Cuba startled the archaeological world in the spring of 2001. Reports from Havana spoke of massive stone blocks stacked at a depth of 2,100 feet in perpendicular and circular formations, some resembling pyramids. Researchers in a miniature submarine described the area as an urban development with structures that may once have been roads and bridges. Because a pre-Diluvian lost city does not fit into the accepted paradigm of prehistory, the halls of orthodoxy remain silent on the matter, at least for now. And while these halls still stand, other recent discoveries have begun to seriously erode their foundations. Finding the ruins of an ancient submerged civilization raises more questions than it answers and causes more problems than it solves. How did the land and its structures sink? What could have prompted such a large-scale cataclysm? When did civilization on Earth actually begin? What do we really know about the ancient past and human origins? And how does the establishment of science, so fixed in its doctrine, grapple with the potential demise of its most cherished presumptions? A lot of questions. If the lost city of the Caribbean wasn't enough, about the same time an equally startling discovery occurred 25 miles off the coast of Gujarat, India. Sorry if I mispronounced that. Uh, the discovery took place in that part of the Arabian Sea known as the Gulf of Cambay. India's National Institute of Ocean Technology turned up some amazing sonar images from the Gulf's Gulf's depths while scanning for pollution levels. Using equipment that penetrates the sea floor, marine experts discovered a pattern of distinct man-made formations across a 5-mile stretch of seabed. According to reports published worldwide, NIOT, the National Institute of Ocean Technology, sonar imaging technology detected that what appeared to be the stone pillars and collapsed walls of at least 2 cities. The site was described as part of an ancient river valley civilization, not unlike the river Saraswati of the Rig Veda, sorry, the Big Veda, thought to be. That sounds like a rapper's uh, name. I don't know why. All the Biggie this, Biggie that, whatever. Big Veda. Sorry, a little brain tangent there. The river Saraswati of the Rig Veda, thought to be mythical, but according to recent independent findings by Indian scientists, has been proved to have flowed to Gujarat. Divers at the Gulf of Cambay site later retrieved from depths of 120 feet 2,000 man-made artifacts, including pottery, jewelry, sculpture, human bones, and evidence of writing, according to the Times of London. And then it gives us 5 pictures. The first is inscribed pottery from the Gulf of Cambay. 2 is artifact from the Gulf of Cambay, small asymmetrical cylinder object with hollowed middle. 3 is artifact from the Gulf of Cambay, possible carving of a deer or another animal, appears symmetrical on both sides of object. 4, group of 4 objects from the Gulf of Cambay, so stuff they didn't know what to call it, so they just grouped them together. 5 is artifact from the Gulf of Cambay, stone slab suggested by Nayat to be engraved with archaic script or other deliberate marking or symbols. So let's see how those come through on screen. Sorry, everything's backwards. There we go. So this is actually 3. So 1, 2, 3, and then the group of 4 things here, and then the last one is that slab with the markings. You can't really see the markings in the picture, though. But anyway, moving on. Quote, underwater structures that have been found along the Gulf of Cambay, Gujarat, indicate an ancient township that could date back anywhere before or during the Harappan civilization. End quote. Science and Technology Minister Murli Manohar Joshi told the world at a press conference in May 2001. Joshi's initial guess was that the 5-mile-long site was 4,000 to 6,000 years old and had been submerged by an extremely powerful earthquake. But in January 2002, carbon dating revealed that an artifact from the site was astonishingly ancient, between 8,500 and 9,500 years old, the oldest known civilization in the world by thousands of years. This was a time when, according to orthodox archaeological standards, India should have been peopled with primitive hunter-gatherers and a few settlements, not the inhabitants of a lost civilization. And of course, by this time they already knew about Göbekli Tepe, but they hadn't dated it, I think, or hadn't officially dated it, because we know that it was deliberately buried about 11,000 years ago. 11 to 12,000. So it's been pushed back even farther than that. Although they're still trying to say it was made by hunter-gatherers, which is complete horseshit, in my opinion. Do I have evidence to prove that it's horseshit? No. It just doesn't make any sense. Hunter-gatherers have never been known to do that sort of thing. They don't build anything permanent. Anyway, the author and underwater researcher Graham Hancock described buildings at the site being hundreds of feet in length, with drains running along the streets. Quote, if the case is made for the age of the underwater cities, then it means that the foundations are out of the bottom of archaeology, end quote, Hancock said. The scope and sophistication of the site dismantles the specific belief that civilization began 5,000 years ago in Sumeria, according to Hancock, even as the alternative scholarship movement, of which he is a central figure, in general challenges orthodox views about human origins. In the orthodox Darwinist view, life and then human beings emerged extremely slowly from highly improbable accidental causes over a period of time necessitated by laws of probability. The theoretical 4 billion year age of the planet was determined not by scientific or geologic evidence, according to the science writer Richard Milton, author of Facts of Life Shattering the Myth of Darwinism, but by estimating how long it should have taken for accidental life to have occurred, given the extreme improbability of life having occurred at all through random material causes. That's interesting. I hadn't actually ever heard that. Civilizations followed, according to the scenario, after the theoretical out of Africa migration about 100,000 years ago. Fairly recently in prehistory, evidence of fairly recently in prehistory, period. Evidence of extremely ancient civilizations or of severe cataclysmic disruptions, those resembling mythical events that may have shaped the ancient world, throws a wrench into the conventional machinery. Discoveries that reveal civilizations having existed several thousand years earlier than previously thought are greeted with disbelief, consternation, silence. Evidence, then, of modern man having lived, say, 250,000 years ago in South America is considered preposterous and heretical, although the evidence for it exists. Other views, modern and ancient, portray life as having emerged by more mysterious means, not by a series of astronomically improbable accidents, not through a biblical creationist scenario, but by virtue of some other unknown agency. This other unknown agency, an all-pervasive life force more in keeping with the Tao of physics than Origin of Species, is such as that evidenced in Eastern healing disciplines and codified impressionistically in the world's mythologies. Okay. In this latter view, the idea that prehistoric civilizations existed needs not be rejected due to a presumption that life evolved from material causes alone over an arbitrary timeline necessitated by improbability. Tradition in India has always held, in fact, that Indian culture predates all understanding, being virtually timeless, stretching into the mists of antiquity from whence sprang the gods and myth, the non-space, non-time reality of modern theoretical physics. As we shall see, certain mythical traditions maintain that the landmass of ancient India greatly exceeded its present size, and even that it stretched from Australia to Madagascar, perhaps as an archipelago. As with the archaeological discovery of Troy, once thought to be a myth, it must be recognized that at least some of India's supposedly mythical traditions are rooted in historical fact. This leads to the idea of an Asian Atlantis, which may seem fantastic, but early geologists believed such a continent existed. The notion may again be gaining credence after the discoveries in the Gulf of Cambay and given Nayat's intention to investigate other submerged archaeological sites off Mahabalipuram and Pumpuhar in Tamil Nadu. Sorry if I'm butchering all of those names. Current conceptions of Western scholars conflict with traditional Indian beliefs about such things, but that wasn't always the case. In the mid to late 19th century, when scientific ideas about human origins had begun to take shape in Europe, early geologists and archaeologists accepted the idea of a biblical flood, lost continents for which they found much evidence, and a landmass in the Indian Ocean, the great southern continent of the British naturalist Alfred Russel Wallace. Even today, mainstream science believes such landmasses as Gondwanaland and Pangaea existed, although they are relegated to the extremely ancient epochs of 180 to 200 million years ago. In keeping with beliefs about the age of the planet necessitated by an admittedly improbable evolutionary process, and consider the South Asian traditions that mimic the findings of the early geologists, those who say an inhabited continent existed across what are now the Indian Ocean, the Arabian Sea, and the Bay of Bengal. These traditions live to this day in the lore of southern India, Sri Lanka, and the islands of the Andaman Sea. Make sure. Okay. Quote, in a former age, an ancient Sri Lankan text states, the citadel of Rawana, Lord of Lanka, 25 palaces and 400,000 streets were swallowed by the sea. End quote. The submerged landmass, according to one ancient account, rested between Tuticorin on the southwest Indian coast and Mannar in Sri Lanka. This submerged landmass was not a landmass of the size envisioned by the early geologists, but, if it actually existed, a submerged portion of the Indian continent just the same. Another cultural tradition cited in Allen and Dallaire's Cataclysm, compelling evidence of a cosmic catastrophe in 9500 BC, that of the Selungs of the Mergui archipelago of southern Burma, also speaks of a sunken landmass. Quote, formerly the country was of continental dimensions, but the daughter of an evil spirit threw many rocks into the sea. The waters rose and swallowed up the land. Everything alive perished except what was able to save itself on one island that remained above the waters. End quote. Sounds very, very much like the biblical flood story, doesn't it? One of the Tamil epics of southern India, this one's a long one, Silapadhikaram. Silapadhikaram frequently mentions a vast tract of land called Kumaranadu, also known as Kumari Kandam, stretching far beyond India's present-day coasts. Ancient South Indian commentators wrote in detail of a prehistoric Tamil Sangam, a spiritual academy situated in that ancient land. They wrote also of the submersion of two rivers, the Kumari and the Paroli, in the middle of the continent, and of a country dotted with mountain ranges, animals, vegetation, and 49 provinces. This Pandya kingdom, according to tradition, reigned from 30,000 BCE to 16,500 BCE. At least one branch of the modern-day South Indian mystics claims a direct lineage from those extraordinarily ancient times, when their spiritual progenitors were said to have achieved extremely long lives through yogic techniques. And India's epic poem, the Mahabharata, dated by non-westernized Indian scholars to 5,000 years before Christ, contains references to its hero, Rama, raising from India's present-day west coast into a vast gazing, sorry, gazing from India's present-day west coast into a vast landmass now accompanied, sorry, I kind of lost it, occupied by the Arabian Sea. An account supported by the recent underwater discoveries. Less celebrated Indian texts even mention advanced technology in the form of aircraft used to transport the society's elite and wage war. The Vimana aircraft. I've read about that. I used to have a whole book on it. I don't know if I still do, but I'll look for it. The writings describe these aircraft in detail and at great length, puzzling scholars and historians. The great Indian epics, what's more, vividly describe militaristic devastation that can be equated only with nuclear war. Was there at one time not just an ancient civilization in India, but an advanced ancient civilization? Flying machines, lost continents? Are these mystical tales of mythical lands, or do these ancient references provide us with a historical record long forgotten and then dismissed by Western science as fantasy? To answer the question, we must look at the history of scholarship as it pertains to India. Since the 19th century, Western scholars have dismissed the historical significance of the cultural tradition of ancient peoples, those of southern Asia included. With a decidedly ethnocentric bias, the experts reinterpreted history as it was taught in the East, having found, for example, that root words of India's ancient Sanskrit turn up almost universally in the world's major languages. Western scholars devised an ethnocentric scheme to explain the phenomenon, one that modern Indian intellectuals have come to accept. A previous European people must have once existed, the scholars imagined, an Indo-European race upon which the world, including India, drew for its linguistic roots and genetic stock. The scholars who expropriated the Aryans of ancient India to flesh out their scenario. This Aryan race, not the same Aryan, as far as I know, that Hitler talked about, although maybe, who knows. But what they're talking about is an ancient Indian race. This Aryan race, they told us, derived from Europe and then invaded the Indus Valley in the north of India, making Sanskrit and Vedic culture relatively young and a product rather than a progenitor of Western civilization. The Aryan invasion theory has since fallen into disrepute. James Schaefer of Case Western University, a noted archaeologist specializing in ancient India, had this to say on the matter. Quote, "The archaeological record and ancient oral and literate traditions of South Asia are now converging." End quote. In other words, India's mythology is being proved historically accurate. Schaefer then wrote, quote, "A few scholars have proposed that there is nothing in the literature firmly placing the Indo-Aryans outside of South Asia, and now the archaeological record is confirming this. We reject most strongly the simplistic historical interpretations of Western scholars, which date back to the 18th century. These still prevailing interpretations are significantly diminished by European ethnocentrism, colonialism, racism." End quote. Southern India, a land whose cultural roots are said by some to stretch into an even more profound antiquity than do those of the north, suffered a similar fate. Speakers of a Proto-Dravidian language, the forerunner of a family of languages spoken in the south, and some say of Sanskrit itself, entered in India from the northwest. The Western scholars insist. Both invasion theories were necessitated by Western beliefs, at first about the Garden of Eden theory of origins, and then, with the arrival of the Darwinists, beliefs about the widely held out of Africa theory. But the Aryan invasion theory has been debunked. No skeletal evidence shows any differences between the supposed invaders and the indigenous peoples of India, and satellite imagery now shows that the ancient Harappan civilization of the Indus Valley and Mohenjo-daro probably declined and disappeared due to climatic changes, the drying up of the mythical Saraswati River, rather than the descent of imaginary invaders. The demise of the Aryan invasion theory, though, and the recently discovered underwater ruins open a Pandora's box for Orthodox scholars regarding the past, not just India's past, but that of the human race. If Sanskrit predates the world's other languages, and if ancient civilizations existed where there are now seas, how can prehistory be explained in modern Western terms? And how much of the ancient history of India is still obscured by ethnocentrism, colonialism, or scientific materialism? The demise of the Aryan invasion theory may represent only the tip of the iceberg of misconceptions about the age and nature of ancient Indian accomplishments. I am really bothered in a way by the constantly trying to push in colonialism as part of why they had the theories they had. It just, to me, that's reaching. Like colonialism, we colonized India, or England colonized India, so that automatically made them think that the Aryan invasion. That's a reach for me. It's way too much of a reach. Anyway, and even though this is almost 20 years ago, or is 20 years ago, it's like we're hearing it even more now. Everything's about colonialism. You're a colonizer and all that bullshit. Um, so anyway, my current reaction to something from 20 years ago, I guess. And how much of the actual history of India is still obscured by ethnocentrism, colonialism, and scientific materialism. The demise of the Aryan invasion theory may represent only the tip of the iceberg of misconceptions about the age and nature of ancient India, her culture, her people, and her accomplishments. It has long been claimed that Mother India was born in a time before all myth began, when rishis, men of great wisdom and phenomenal spiritual attainment, walked on earth. This ancient India dates to the times out of which the epic poems of Ramayana and Mahabharata and the ancient traditions of Tamil Nadu in the south grew. The Tamil Nadu was a land whose culture is said by some to predate that of the north, having once existed as part of Kumari Kandam and dating to a staggering 30,000 BCE. A great deluge inundated Kumari Kandam. Obscure texts of the Siddhanta tradition of Tamil Nadu reportedly say. This is a notion echoed in the writing of Colonel James Churchward and W.S. Survey, both of whom claim knowledge of texts, Indian and Tibetan, respectively, that speak of a long-lost continent situated in the east. While continental drift theory presumes the extremely slow and uniform movement of land masses over many hundreds of millions of years, a great deal of evidence exists that Earth's surface changed rapidly and violently in recent prehistory. A great sudden extinction of mammals and plants took place on the planet around the end of the last ice age, perhaps as recently as 12,000 years ago. Hundreds of mammal and plant species disappeared from the face of the earth, many of the carcasses having been driven by flooding into deep caverns and charred piles the world over. Modern science has been unable to adequately explain this event and unwilling to consider what seems obvious based on the evidence. And now, again, 20 years later, we have the theories that the ice cap was struck by multiple comets, actually, not asteroids, but comets, which is why there's not a bunch of meteoric rock to show as evidence, but struck and melted by that at the end of the Younger Dryas, which was about 12,000 years. D.S. Allen, sorry. D.S. Allen and J.B. Dallaire in Cataclysm, Compelling Evidence of a Cosmic Catastrophe in 9500 BC, amass a formidable quantity of known evidence corroborating the flood conflagration legends stored in the world's mythological record. If we suspend belief in the textbook accounts of prehistory, Allen and Dallaire fill the void in a convincing way, replacing gradualist doctrines that involved extremely slow glacial movements, which are supposed to have accounted for the Great Extinction, with what seems to have been, upon a review of the evidence, a worldwide phenomenal disaster that submerged land masses and ruptured Earth's crust. Much of the evidence centers on southern Asia. Records gathered by the Swedish survey ship Albatross in 1947 reveal a vast plateau of hardened lava for at least several hundred miles southeast of Sri Lanka. The lava evidence of a severe rupture in Earth's crust fills most of the now submerged valleys that once existed there. The immense eruption that gave off the lava may have coincided with the downfall of Wallace's southern continent, aka Kumarikandam, for which much zoological and botanical evidence exists that would give such a landmass a recent date. According to Allen and Dallaire, not the 180 million years that orthodoxy describes to such a continent. The lost cities of the Gulf of Cambay may have suffered a similar fate. At the same time, or as a result of unstable tectonic conditions resulting from the initial disturbance, an asteroid perhaps, or a displacement of Earth's crust that caused the recent extinction and destruction of the ancient cities. Among the troves of evidence compiled by early geologists and resurrected by Allen and Dallaire as are Asian bone caves filled with diverse species of recent prehistoric animals from around the world. Their carcasses could have been driven to their final resting place only by vast amounts of water moving across the globe. In light of Allen and Dallaire's work, other evidence such as India's Deccan Trap, a vast triangular plain of lava several thousand feet thick covering 250,000 square miles, and the Indo-Gangetic Trough, a gigantic crack in Earth's surface stretching from Sumatra through India to the Persian Gulf, can be interpreted as evidence of a cataclysm that ruptured Earth's crust, submerged various land masses, and caused the Great Extinction. Other titillating fragments of anomalous evidence suggest a pervasive, if not advanced, seafaring or even airborne culture having once existed in ancient India. For example, the identical nature of the Indus Valley script to that found at Easter Island, on the other other side of the Pacific Ocean. Initial reports suggest it should be noted that the script found recently in the Gulf of Cambay resembles the Indus Valley script. According to certain South Indian researchers, the indecipherable scripts are written in a Proto-Tamil language, which would link the culture of distant Easter Island and its famous megalithic statues with ancient southern India, Kumari Kandam, an idea echoed in the lore of Easter Island the lore of Easter Islanders about a lost continent to the west from which their people originated. With the recent advent of underwater archaeology, records of the past are being rewritten. More research is needed, as well as more expeditions into treacherous waters and the depths of the world's oceans. But more than ever, textbook scenarios of prehistory are drowning of their own weight, while scenes of more glorious past rise to the surface via acoustic imaging. Past being prologue, those images are of interest not to academics alone, but to all who would solve the mystery of human origins. Ugh, the last part of that one was rough. I was not reading very well. Sorry. But some interesting stuff in there that I have never read before about more sunken continents than I was aware of. And I have never heard of what was it called? Not the well, I'd never heard of India's Deccan Trap, the triangular lava field. Um, but the Gangetic or Gangetic trough, I've never heard of that either. Going from Sumatra through India to the Persian Gulf. That is one long crack, and I've never even heard of it. So, yeah, that's some interesting stuff in that one. And it gives me some ideas for something else I'm writing up. But I'm going to just move right on into the next article, which is the 11th article in our book. And there are a bunch of big pictures in it. So it should be a bit quicker. And this one is Pushing Back the Portals of Civilization. For John Anthony West, the quest for evidence of advanced prehistoric civilization is bearing new fruit, by J. Douglas Kenyon, our editor of the book. And it starts with a quote. Quote, just as an athlete's ego is bound up in winning and he feels miserable at losing the Super Bowl, chuckles John Anthony West, the egos of scholars and scientists are tied up in being right. They don't have much money and much fame, and there's no glamour in it. And when someone comes along like me from out of left field, they react like scalded cats. End quote. Tormenting the reigning breed of cats remains a favorite source of amusement to those self-appointed scourge of the Church of Progress. For West, the modern Western version of civilization with its hydrogen bombs and striped toothpaste is no match for its long-buried predecessors, both historic and otherwise. And scholars who disrespect the legacy of our ancient forebears West considers to be, at the very least, idiotic. When the saga of Atlantis Rising magazine began in November 1994, our cover story, Getting Answers from the Sphinx, featured the brewing storm surrounding research by West and the Boston University geologist Robert M. Schoch, Ph.D., indicating that the Sphinx of Giza was rain-weathered and thus thousands of years older than it had been maintained by the Egyptological establishment. The controversy has hardly subsided. Since that time, the writers Graham Hancock and Robert Bovell have joined the fray with enormous internationally best-selling books. Wow, all of a sudden I can't read. Underscoring West's contentions and adding their own concerning the astronomical purposes of the Giza monuments. And while all four remain persona non grata among the most professional Egyptologists, their ideas, publicized worldwide in numerous media accounts, have achieved an unprecedented notoriety and forced the establishment to break from its standard practice of simply ignoring impudent notions and actually, on occasion, to argue the merits of them. The result has not been particularly encouraging to the Church of Progress. The September 16, 2002 Fox TV National Geographic special entitled Opening the Lost Tombs Live from Egypt, aired live from Giza in prime time, was but the latest of many broadcasts to give major time to the heretical views of West, Schock, Hancock, and Bovell. Despite all efforts of the debunkers, support for their notions continues to snowball. At the heart of the controversy are the mysteries surrounding the birth of civilization. Did we, as the academic establishment insists, emerge from the Stone Age about 5,000 years ago and only then begin the slow and painful ascent to our present lofty heights? Or was there, in remotest antiquity, a fountainhead of civilization that rose to levels of sophistication equal, if not superior, to our own, and yet which vanished so completely that hardly a trace of it remains? If the latter is true and can be proved, the implications are profound indeed, if not earth-shaking. West and Schock may be producing the first scientifically irrefutable evidence for the existence of that progenitor culture, could be one of the most important scholarly achievements of our time, and one that could reign convincingly on the parade of the Church of Progress. Atlantis Rising talked with John West about his ongoing struggle with the establishment and new evidence he has accumulated to buttress and perhaps clinch his case for the existence of a sophisticated prehistoric civilization. He also talked about his debt to an obscure Alsatian archaeologist whose contribution to our understanding of ancient Egypt is only beginning to be appreciated. And there's a photo of John Anthony West at the Sphinx. There we go. The legacy of Schwaller de Lubitz. The master plan to understanding the wisdom of ancient Egypt is already in place. West believes, but does not, as you might expect, come from within the precincts of the Egyptological establishment. The massive work of R.A. Schwaller de Lubitz, assembled during an exhaustive study of the temple at Luxor from 1937 to 1952, amounts to nothing less than a unified field theory of the philosophy and science of ancient Egypt. Schwaller de Lubitz is best known for his comprehensive seminal work on ancient Egypt entitled The Temple of Man. He founded the symbolist school of Egyptology, of which West is currently the most outspoken proponent. West's book, Serpent in the Sky, remains the most complete commentary in English on Schwaller de Lubitz's work. Schwaller de Lubitz was looking for evidence of ancient insight into the principles of harmony and proportion. In particular, he was looking for knowledge of the golden section, a ratio mathematically expressed as 1 plus the square root of 5 over 2. which has been credited to the Greeks but not the Egyptians. Using measurements that were then in the process of determination by a French team of architects and archaeologists, Schwaller de Lubitz was able to demonstrate that indeed the golden section was applied at Luxor and with a complexity and sophistication never achieved by the Greeks. Pause. Here was irrefutable evidence of advanced mathematical development, existing more than 1,000 years before Pythagoras. Quote, obviously this didn't spring out of nowhere, says West. New Kingdom Egypt, Luxor was built by Amenhotep III in the 14th century BCE, is in the tradition of Middle and Old Kingdom Egypt. So by extension, Schwaller de Lubitz pretty much proved that Egypt understood harmony and proportion from the reputed very beginnings of existence back to 3000 BCE or a bit earlier, end quote. All of which suggests the likelihood of still older developments, coinciding nicely with the theories of West and Schock about the age of the Sphinx, which interestingly were based upon a casual observation by Schwaller de Lubitz that the Sphinx had been weathered by water. Quote, Egypt was in no way a kind of magnificent dry run for Greece, which in turn gave rise to our brilliant civilization, says West. The Greeks themselves acknowledged the greater fount and source of the wisdom that came later. In other words, civilization has been on a downhill slide since ancient Egypt. In fact, ancient Egypt itself... Wait a minute, sorry, I kind of lost my place. Ancient Egypt itself was on a downhill trip from its very beginnings because, strangely enough, it reached to an absolute peak, the height of its prowess and sophistication, fairly early in the Old Kingdom, around 2500 BCE, and pretty much everything thereafter was a lesser accomplishment, even the fabulous temples of the New Kingdom. End quote. And then, quote, but... the question has always persisted, if there was an advanced civilization in prehistory, where are the artifacts? End quote. That is a question that John West has long sought to answer, and with the discoveries at the Sphinx, he has made a significant first step. But the undeniable physical remains of that mother culture, he insists, are in no way limited to the Sphinx. Several sites, potentially as compelling, provide evidence that thousands of years before the oldest acknowledged remnants of the so-called Old Kingdom, Egypt was host to a highly developed civilization. One previously unnoticed site West now believes might well make his case. Secrets of the Red Pyramid. Usually attributed to the 4th dynasty, Pharaoh Snefru, the Red Pyramid of Dashur is part of a military reservation and was until recently closed to the public. A near equal in total volume to the Great Pyramid, credited to Snefru's son Cheops, the Red Pyramid, so named for its pink granite, slopes a bit more gently. Fairly accessible now, it offers visitors the opportunity to climb a steep staircase on the northern face and then descend the 138 steps of a long sloping corridor to the first of two high gabled chambers that, though horizontal, resemble the grand gallery of the Great Pyramid. At the end of the second chamber are wooden steps provided by the Egyptian Antiquities Department, leading to still a third gabled chamber, which, rising to the height of 50 feet, is at right angles to the first two. Standing on a wooden balcony, the visitor is able to look down into a kind of pit surrounded by a jumble of worked stones. No sign of a burial or of any kind has ever been found in the Red Pyramid. When this writer first looked at that place, several points seemed obvious. The stones in the pit were clearly of a different type from those of the structure above. Moreover, while the pyramid had been built With great precision, the arrangement of the pit was chaotic, and even though the stones were doubtless cut artificially, their edges had been rounded in a way that suggested water weathering. I remarked to West that I thought the place must be part of a much older site, over which the Red Pyramid had been built, possibly to memorialize a sacred spot. Whatever weathering had occurred clearly had been brought to a halt by the sheltering pyramid. In making these observations, I thought I was doing no more than stating the obvious, but to my amazement, John West became very excited. Quote, "I think you're absolutely right," he exclaimed. I don't see any other possible explanation." End quote. As it turned out, this was not the first time he had wondered about the meaning of that chamber. Quote, "I'd been into that red pyramid half a dozen times since it reopened a couple of years ago," he recalled, puzzling over this strange so-called burial chamber, which didn't look as though it had been plundered. End quote. And then we've got three pictures of this inner chamber. The top, burial chamber beneath the Red Pyramid of Dashur. Middle is Red Pyramid burial chamber. Note the line between Old Kingdom masonry above an older structure below. And then the bottom is ancient weathered masonry in the burial chamber beneath the Red Pyramid. So, sorry. I don't know how well you can see that. So that's the chamber. Then the second one, you can see to the one side the smooth stone where it meets the rougher stone. And then there's another picture of the chamber, which is very chaotic and rough compared to the stone above it. Okay, John West continues, quote, "Why is it that in that state of disarray, it looks as though it's been taken apart, but then it doesn't look as though it's been taken apart? Not once did it occur to me that, hey, this was once outside, not inside. Yes, these are old, deeply weathered stones. The trick now is to get the geologists over here and see just what kind of stones they are." End quote. The experts, like Schock, West believes, will also find ways of dating the place. Currently, West is of the opinion that the stones are hard limestone and very old indeed. Quote, "I think it was a sacred spot to the very ancient Egyptians," he said, "and they built the whole Red Pyramid around it." End quote. Throughout the rest of our tour, West referred again and again to what he said he felt was a, quote, "truly important discovery," even dubbing the chamber Kenyon's Cavern, and adding that he felt the place might serve as nothing had yet to clinch his case. That he felt the place might... that's a weird sentence. I didn't... Quote, "The opposition is always saying," complains West, how can the Sphinx be the only evidence of this earlier civilization? Well, it isn't. But then they go selectively deaf when I start pointing out the other pieces of evidence." End quote. Before the discovery of the Red Pyramid, he looked at the mastaba fields southwest of the Sphinx, where a structure once served as the tomb of Khentkhaz, the queen of Menkaure, the builder, it is said, of the third and smallest Giza pyramid. The ruined southwest corner of the structure reveals that the 4,500-year-old repair covers blocks that are obviously much older and which bear the same telltale signs of water weathering that caused all the furor to the nearby Sphinx. And there are other anomalies. The two-stage construction of Khafra pyramid. The Greek historian Herodotus is our only source for the attribution. The giant blocks on the bottom and on the paving, the slabs around the base, are absolutely out of sync with the other Old Kingdom masonry that constitutes the pyramid. The same applies to the Menkaure pyramid. And again, we have two pictures. One is the corner of the tomb of Kent Kos. Old Kingdom masonry reveals older weathered masonry beneath. And the other is the Osirian at Abydos, which we haven't gotten to in the text yet, but I'll show it anyway. This is the first one. And there is definitely some weathering on some of those. I would point to it, but I'm having trouble even navigating to the right spot here. And then there's the other one. That's the Osirian at Abydos. So, back to the text. And there's the deeply weathered shaft east of the midpoint of the Saqqara pyramid. That finishes the quote. Sorry. He also sees strange inconsistencies between the valley temple near the Sphinx and other constructions supposedly by Chephren. Moreover, West believes that the so-called Osirian of Abydos, with its massive undecorated granite blocks, is certainly much older and of a style completely alien to the neighboring temple of Osiris built by Seti I in the New Kingdom. Osiris, however you prefer to pronounce it. Quote, the attribute to attribute these two temples to the same builder is like saying the builders of the Chartres Cathedral also built the Empire State Building. End quote. West is hopeful that the many feet of Nile silt strata that once covered the Osirian and which still surround it will eventually be carbon dated, and that this will put the matter to rest. West's evidence is not confined to architecture. In the Cairo Museum, for instance, is a small vase associated with the dawn of the Old Kingdom, made from the hardest of diorite. The precision of its form and its perfectly hollowed interior are impossible to explain in terms of any known tooling techniques of the time. It could be much older, as could many similar vases that have been discovered. And of course there are the pyramid texts carved into the walls of 5th and 6th dynasty pyramids. The consensus among experts is that the texts were copied from much older sources. Just how much older is the question. On that same trip to Egypt, West was accompanied by Cleason H. Harvey, a physicist and linguist who had spent the better part of 40 years translating the pyramid texts. The texts, Harvey believes, reveal that the Egyptian religion originates not millennia, but rather tens of millennia before the Old Kingdom. West thinks Harvey is on the right track. Despite the weight of the evidence, though, West is not expecting establishment Egyptology to give ground quickly. Quote, it's very similar to the Church of the Middle Ages and its rejection of Galileo's heliocentric solar system. The centrality of humanity in God's scheme wasn't something they were prepared to give up easily. Now the idea of a much more ancient source of civilization is a very hard thing for Egyptologists to acknowledge, and it's not just that civilization is older, but that it was sophisticated and capable of producing technological feats that we can't reproduce. End quote. Toward a proper Egyptology. When it comes to proposing a suitable course for Egyptology, West is not ungenerous with his advice. PhDs in the field, he feels, would be better earned on challenges more meaningful than in inventorying Tutankhamun's underwear. In fact, he can reel off dozens of suitable projects for more enlightened research. He would, for example, like to see the kind of meticulous architectural studies that Schwaller de Lubitz did on the Temple of Luxor done elsewhere. Studies of that type, he feels, should be applied to certain temples to determine the harmonics, proportions, measures, and so on. Quote, the temples have been surveyed, but nobody's looked at their geometric breakdown, how they grow from the core sanctuary into the finalized temple. It's through that kind of study that you would come to understand the esoteric doctrine, mathematical, geometric, harmonic, etc., attached to each of the gods or principles, end quote. West also believes that a study of gestures in temple art would yield much insight. Another possible line of research has to do with the systematic effacements of temple walls. He has observed that the careful selection in many temples of certain images to efface indicates not the work of later religious fanatics, but instead the carefully considered actions of Egyptian priests who saw one era ending and another dawning and were taking the appropriate measures. So far, though, there appears to be no rush to pick up his gauntlet. Yet if the present surge of interest in what he and Schwaller de Lubitz might call a return to the source continues, an emerging generation of scholars equipped with new information and deeper insight may soon venture into terrain where few of their predecessors have dared to go. The end. That is it. So, some pretty interesting things in both of the articles today. Gives me some ideas. I don't know about y'all, but definitely gives me some ideas. Now, our next two for next week will be new studies confirm very old Sphinx, which we are aware. Oh, there's some color stuff here shoved into the middle of the book. And then R.A. Schwaller de Lubitz magnum opus. Those will be the two articles for next week. And yeah, we'll pick up there. And we're really only maybe a little over a third of the way through the book, so got a ways to go. Stay tuned. Come back. I'm going to take a break for maybe 10-15 minutes, and then I'll end this session, but I'll come back in about 10 minutes and start the next session, which is gaming, Fallout 3. So see you then.